Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation to Seabourn. Hercule Poirot had always maintained that the English seaside was admirable only at a distance. Up close, it possessed a damp insistence that crept into one's cuffs, one's collar, and, most offensive of all, one's sense of order. As the train slowed into Seabourn Station, exhaling steam into a sky the colour of old pewter, Poirot regarded the platform with measured disapproval. "Too much mist," he murmured, adjusting his immaculate moustache. "It blurs the edges of things." And yet, his eyes brightened, it also conceals them. That is sometimes useful. He stepped down onto the platform with care, his patent shoes gleaming despite the hostile climate. A single porter hovered, eager but uncertain. Poirot allowed himself to be assisted, then consulted his watch. It was precisely 11 o'clock. He nodded, satisfied. Time, at least, still obeyed the rules. The letter that had summoned him lay folded in his pocket, its paper already softened by repeated reading. Miss Lydia Harcourt had written in a firm, upright hand, with no unnecessary flourishes. Her cousin, Mr. Edwin Harcourt, had died 2 weeks earlier in what the local authorities deemed an unfortunate accident. A shelf had fallen in his workshop, striking his head. Death had been swift. The matter, officially, was closed. But Miss Harcourt had written, "There are details that do not sit comfortably with me." My cousin lived by precision. Disorder was to him a moral failing. I cannot reconcile his life with the manner of his death. That sentence alone had decided Poirot. A motorcar conveyed him from the station along a narrow coastal road. On one side, the sea pressed close, restless and grey; on the other, clipped hedges guarded houses that stood back like reserved observers. Seabourn was a town that valued discretion. Poirot approved of that, even if he disliked the air. Harcourt House revealed itself gradually, a tall, pale structure with a symmetrical front and windows arranged with almost mathematical care. It was not grand, but it was deliberate. Poirot noted this at once. Houses, like people, expressed their character without knowing it. Miss Lydia Harcourt met him at the door. She was a woman in her early 50s, spare of build, dressed in mourning that was practical rather than dramatic. Her eyes were keen, assessing, and entirely without sentimentality. "Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Thank you for coming." "The pleasure is mine, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, bowing. Though pleasure is perhaps not the exact word. Let us say, interest. She smiled briefly and led him inside. The hall was cool and orderly. A clock stood on a small table by the stairs, its face ivory white, its hands slender and exact. As Poirot passed it, the clock chimed, softly, politely. He stopped. "Forgive me," he said, turning back. "May I ask the time?" Miss Harcourt glanced at her wristwatch. 3 minutes past 11. Poirot's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. He took out his own watch, compared it, then replaced it without comment. "Curious," he said mildly. "Very curious indeed." Miss Harcourt looked at him sharply. "You noticed it too?" "Ah," Poirot said. "So it is not an accident." She hesitated, then gestured for him to follow her into the drawing room. There, a second clock ticked on the mantelpiece. Poirot listened. Tick. Tick. When it chimed, the sound echoed the first 3 minutes past the hour. "All the clocks in the house are like that," Miss Harcourt said. "They were my cousin's pride. He serviced them himself. They were always exact. Always. And now?" And now they are all wrong. In the same way. Poirot seated himself carefully, smoothing his trousers. Mademoiselle, you are beginning very well. Uniformity in error is more suspicious than chaos. She exhaled, as though relieved to hear her unease given shape. The police dismissed it. They said Edwin must have adjusted them shortly before his death and made a mistake. Poirot smiled faintly. The police are very fond of mistakes made by the dead. They require no further explanation. Miss Harcourt's lips tightened. Edwin did not make mistakes. Tell me about your cousin, Poirot said gently. She did so with economy. Edwin Harcourt had been a clockmaker of unusual skill, known beyond the county for his restorations. He worked mostly alone, preferring the company of mechanisms to that of people. His workshop occupied a converted wing of the house, and there he spent long hours, often late into the night. He believed time revealed character, she said. If a clock ran fast or slow, it was because someone had interfered or neglected it. Poirot nodded. A philosopher. There were disagreements, Miss Harcourt continued. About the business. About money. But nothing that should have ended like this. Who lives in the house? Poirot asked. My nephew, Simon. And Mrs. Fenwick, our housekeeper. There is also Mr. Thomas Reed, my cousin's business partner. He does not live here, but he was present on the day Edwin died. Poirot's eye sharpened at this, but he asked no more just then. Instead, he rose. May I see the workshop? Miss Harcourt hesitated only a moment before agreeing. She led him down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of oil and metal. At the end stood a door, now closed. This is where he was found, she said quietly. Poirot placed his hand on the handle, then paused. He listened. From within came a soft, layered sound, dozens of clocks ticking, each at its own pace, yet forming a strange, collective rhythm. Time speaks, Poirot murmured. We must be very attentive. He opened the door. The workshop was a small universe of gears, springs, and pendulums. Clocks lined the walls, stood on benches, hung from hooks. Tools lay arranged with obsessive care. Near the center, a wooden shelf had been reattached. Beneath it, the floorboards were newly polished. Poirot stepped inside, breathing deeply. His gaze moved slowly, lovingly, from object to object. Nothing escaped him, the angle of a chair, the position of a window left slightly ajar, the faint, dark smear near the workbench. An accident, he said softly, to no one in particular. Yes. It has all the appearance of one. He turned to Miss Harcourt, his eyes suddenly alight. But appearances, mademoiselle, are often the most dangerous things of all. Chapter 2, The Workshop of Many Times. Hercule Poirot remained standing just inside the workshop for a full minute, perhaps longer. To Miss Harcourt, it might have seemed an odd hesitation, but Poirot was not idle. He was listening. The sound was complex, dozens of clocks ticking at once, each with its own voice. Some were brisk and eager, others slow and contemplative. Together they formed a faint, restless murmur, like a roomful of people whispering secrets. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. A most undisciplined chorus, he said. Your cousin allowed this? Miss Harcourt shook her head. Never. He hated disorder. He would say that clocks, like people, should each know their place, but they must agree on the hour. Poirot nodded. And on the day of his death? They were in perfect harmony. I remember it clearly. I came in to bring him tea. All the clocks chimed together. It startled me. Poirot stepped further into the room. He moved slowly, almost reverently, as though afraid to disturb the balance of things. His eyes travelled from wall to wall, shelf to shelf. He noted the careful arrangement of tools, the neat labels on drawers, the small handwritten cards identifying each clock and its ailment. This man, Poirot said, was not careless. No, Miss Harcourt agreed quietly. Poirot approached the shelf that had supposedly caused Edwin Harcourt's death. It was a solid wooden construction, fixed above the main workbench. The repair was visible if one knew where to look. New screws were a shade lighter than the rest. He reached up and pressed gently against it. It did not move. Inspector Hale told me, Miss Harcourt said, that the screws must have loosened over time. Poirot smiled without humour. Inspector Hale has never restored a clock, I think. Things do not simply loosen themselves when they are properly cared for. He crouched, examining the floor beneath the bench. The boards were clean, too clean. They reflected the light faintly. Recently polished, he observed. Yes. Afterwards, Poirot repeated. Naturally. He straightened and moved towards the window. It was open an inch or two, letting in the cold sea air. Poirot leaned out slightly, sniffing. Salt, he said. And something else. But it is faint now. What do you mean? Miss Harcourt asked. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned back into the room and gestured towards a low stool. Your cousin sat here. Yes. Always. Poirot adjusted the stool by a fraction of an inch, aligning it squarely with the bench. Like this? She stared. Yes. Exactly like that. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. Then when the shell fell, he would have been struck here. He indicated a precise point above the stool. Not to the side. Not while standing. That is what the doctor said. Ah, doctors, Poirot said lightly. They are very clever with bodies. But they do not always understand behavior. He returned to the center of the workshop and surveyed it as a whole. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong, not crudely wrong, but wrong all the same. The room spoke of control, of habit, of ritual. And yet death had entered it clumsily, like an intruder wearing the wrong shoes. Poirot bent suddenly and picked something up from the floor between two benches. It was small, dark, and easily overlooked. A smear, he said. Miss Harcourt leaned closer. Is it blood? No, Poirot replied. If it were blood, the inspector would have seen it. This is more refined. He rubbed it lightly between his fingers, then brought them to his nose. Shoe polish. Black. Good quality. She frowned. Edwin polished his shoes in his bedroom. Mrs. Fenwick insisted on that. She hated mess. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Just so. Shoe polish in a workshop where it does not belong. That is interesting. He crossed to a small desk in the corner and opened a ledger lying upon it. The pages were filled with neat columns of figures, written in a steady hand. Poirot did not read the amounts. Instead, he tilted the book towards the light. The ink, he murmured. What about it? Some entries are older. See how they have softened into the paper. Others, these here, are sharp, almost impatient. They have not yet settled. You think Edwin wrote in it shortly before his death? Poirot closed the ledger gently. I think someone wrote in it. Whether it was your cousin, we shall see. Miss Harcourt's face tightened. You are saying this was not an accident? Poirot spread his hands. I am saying it is premature to call it one. A sound interrupted them, footsteps in the corridor. Mrs. Fenwick appeared at the door, her expression composed but watchful. She was a tall woman with iron-grey hair and a manner that suggested she missed nothing. "Tea is served," she said. Her eyes flicked to Poirot. "I did not know we had company." "This is Monsieur Poirot," Miss Harcourt said. "He is looking into Edwin's death." Mrs. Fenwick's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. "The police have already looked." "Yes," Poirot said pleasantly. "But I look differently." She sniffed. "As you please." As she turned away, Poirot's gaze lingered on her shoes. They were polished to a high shine. After tea, Poirot requested to see the rest of the house. He examined clocks in the hall, the drawing room, the dining room, even the narrow passage by the kitchen. Each chimed at precisely 3 minutes past the hour. "Always the same error," he said. "Never for minutes. Never 2. Miss Harcourt watched him closely. "You believe someone altered them?" "I believe," Poirot said carefully, "that someone wished time to appear consistent." "That seems pointless." "On the contrary," Poirot replied. "It is extremely useful if one wishes to control when things are believed to have happened." As evening drew in, Poirot retired to the guest room prepared for him. He placed his suitcase neatly on the stand, then took out his pocket watch and set it carefully against the bedside clock. The bedside clock chimed. 3 minutes passed. Poirot smiled faintly. "Someone here," he said to himself, "has been playing with time. And when one tampers with time, one usually does so for a reason." He extinguished the lamp and lay back, listening to the faint ticking through the walls. The house was full of clocks. And one of them, Poirot was certain, was lying. Chapter 3: A Family at Odds. Dinner at Harcourt House was served with a quiet formality that suggested long habit rather than ceremony. The dining room was modest in size, panelled in dark wood that absorbed the light from the shaded lamps. A clock hung above the sideboard, its face stern and Roman numbered. Poirot noted it at once, then took his seat. Miss Lydia Harcourt presided at the head of the table. To her right sat her nephew, Simon Harcourt, and to her left, Mr. Thomas Reed. Mrs. Fenwick moved silently between them, serving with efficiency, her expression as closed as a locked drawer. Poirot observed them all with polite interest, his manner easy, his questions few. He preferred to let people reveal themselves in the small, unconscious ways, the pause before answering, the glance that lingered too long, the hand that tightened around a spoon. Simon Harcourt was a handsome young man in his early 30s, with fair hair and an open smile that came easily. He dressed well, though with a faint air of carelessness, as though clothes were an afterthought. He spoke readily, laughed often, and checked his wristwatch with a frequency that did not escape Poirot. Mr. Thomas Reed was quite different. Slightly built, with thinning hair and a narrow face, he kept his eyes mostly on his plate. When he did look up, it was with a cautious, measuring glance. His suit was respectable but worn, his tie carefully knotted. He ate little. Conversation began harmlessly enough. The weather, the sea, Poirot's journey from London. Simon expressed exaggerated sympathy for Poirot's exposure to provincial transport, while Miss Harcourt responded with dry amusement. "And how do you find Seabourne so far, Monsieur Poirot?" Simon asked. "Charming," Poirot replied. "It has a great respect for routine." Simon laughed. "That was my uncle all over." At this, a slight shift occurred at the table. Miss Harcourt's mouth tightened. Mr. Reed's fork paused halfway to his lips. Edwin was a man of habits, Miss Harcourt said firmly. Habits that served him well. "Oh, certainly," Simon said lightly. "I only meant, well, he could be difficult." Poirot looked at him with mild curiosity. "Difficult in what way, monsieur?" Simon shrugged. "Stubborn. Unwilling to move with the times." He'd rather spend 6 months perfecting a single mechanism than consider expansion. Expansion, Poirot repeated. You speak of the business? Yes. There were opportunities. Investors. Buyers. Edwin wouldn't hear of it. He valued independence, Miss Harcourt said sharply. And honesty. Mr. Reed cleared his throat. Edwin believed growth should be slow, he said quietly. Controlled. Poirot inclined his head. And you agreed with him, Monsieur Reed? Mr. Reed hesitated. I respected his views. Respected, Poirot echoed. That is a careful word. Simon leaned back in his chair. Thomas was always the peacemaker. Weren't you, Thomas? Mr. Reed smiled faintly, without warmth. Poirot turned the conversation gently. And on the day of your uncle's death, monsieur, where were you? Simon answered without pause. In town. I'd stepped out to make a telephone call. I remember the time exactly, 3 minutes past 9. The clock at the post office chimed just as I finished. Poirot's eyebrows rose a fraction. You are very precise. Simon grinned. Family trait, perhaps. Miss Harcourt said nothing, but her eyes flicked briefly to Poirot. After dinner, Poirot requested coffee in the drawing room. The group rearranged itself, the atmosphere looser now, yet still edged with restraint. Poirot settled into an armchair from which he could see everyone, and the clock on the mantelpiece. It chimed softly. Poirot glanced at his watch. 3 minutes past 8. Forgive me, he said, but I am curious. Did anyone else notice the clocks were wrong before Monsieur Harcourt's death? Miss Harcourt shook her head. No. They were exact. Always. Mrs. Fenwick spoke from near the door. Mr. Harcourt checked them daily. And you? Poirot asked her. You notice nothing. She met his gaze squarely. I notice when things are out of place. They were not. Poirot smiled. Then the change occurred after the death. Or at the time of it, Simon said. Indeed, Poirot agreed. At the time of it. He excused himself shortly after, pleading fatigue from travel. In truth, his mind was far from tired. As he climbed the stairs, he passed another clock, this one in the corridor. It ticked steadily, obediently wrong. In his room, Poirot sat at the small writing desk and made notes in his neat hand. Names. Impressions. Inconsistencies. Simon Harcourt, charming, precise when it suited him, careless when it did not. A young man with financial ambitions and a fondness for alibis that sounded rehearsed. Thomas Reed, cautious, restrained, anxious beneath the surface. A man who spoke of respect rather than agreement. Mrs. Fenwick, observant, disciplined, loyal, to whom Poirot was not yet certain. And Miss Lydia Harcourt herself, practical, intelligent, protective of her cousin's memory. A woman who trusted facts more than feelings. Poirot closed his notebook and listened. The house was settling for the night. Somewhere below, a clock chimed the quarter hour, 3 minutes late. He smiled faintly. The next morning, Poirot rose early. He wished to observe the household in its natural rhythm. From the top of the stairs, he watched Mrs. Fenwick move through the hall, efficient as ever. Simon appeared later, yawning, already glancing at his watch. Mr. Reed arrived just before breakfast, hat in hand, apologizing for his tardiness. Traffic, he said. Unpredictable. Poirot said nothing, but noted the time. 3 minutes past 9. During breakfast, Poirot posed an apparently casual question. Monsieur Reed, he said, spreading marmalade carefully. You manage the accounts of the business, yes? Yes, Mr. Reed replied. For several years now. A position of trust. Indeed. And Monsieur Harcourt, he examined them closely. Mr. Reed hesitated. He trusted me. Poirot smiled kindly. Trust is a beautiful thing. But it must be wound carefully, like a fine clock. Too loose, and it stops. Too tight. It breaks, Simon finished lightly. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. As breakfast ended, Poirot excused himself once more, this time to walk in the garden. The sea air was sharp, bracing. He welcomed it. His thoughts were beginning to align. There were tensions here, certainly. Money. Pride. Control. Each could provide a motive. But Poirot knew better than to seize upon the obvious. The truth, like time, often hid in the smallest discrepancies. Behind him, the house stood silent, full of ticking. And somewhere within its walls, Poirot was certain, someone was listening very carefully to the sound of time passing. Chapter 4. 3 minutes passed. The morning mist clung stubbornly to Seabourne, refusing to lift even as the sun climbed higher. From the garden path, Harcourt House appeared blurred at the edges, as though it might dissolve if one stared too long. Hercule Poirot found the effect faintly irritating. He liked clear outlines of buildings, of facts, of people. He returned indoors shortly before 11, shaking the damp from his coat with precise movements. In the hall, the tall clock by the stairs chimed. Poirot looked at his watch. 3 minutes passed. He smiled thinly. Consistency, he reflected, was a habit that could betray its owner. Inspector Hale arrived just after noon. He was a solid, capable man in his 40s, with the air of someone who preferred clear roads and straight answers. He greeted Poirot with polite reserve and accepted Miss Harcourt's offer of tea. "I understand you have some doubts," Hale said, settling into a chair. "Though I must say, we found nothing to suggest foul play." Poirot inclined his head. "I do not dispute your thoroughness, Inspector. Only your conclusion." Hale sighed good-naturedly. "A tragic accident. The shelf fell. The blow was fatal. No sign of a struggle. No weapon. No reason to suspect murder." Poirot steepled his fingers. "No reason is not the same as no motive." Hale smiled faintly. "Everyone argues about money. That does not make them killers." "No," Poirot agreed. "But it makes them human." He suggested a return to the workshop, and Hale agreed. Miss Harcourt accompanied them, her expression intent. The workshop seemed unchanged since Poirot's last visit. The clocks ticked, quarrelling softly among themselves. Hale glanced around with professional detachment. "You see," he said. "Nothing disturbed." Poirot walked directly to the repaired shelf. "Inspector, when this shelf fell, how did it fall?" Hale frowned. "Straight down, I imagine." "Just so," Poirot said. "And yet," he gestured to the bench below. "Nothing here was damaged. No tools displaced. No scratches of falling wood." Hale shrugged. "Lucky, perhaps." Poirot smiled. "Luck is also very fond of accidents." He moved to the floor and crouched. "You cleaned this area?" "Yes." "Blood," Hale said briefly. "And before the blood?" Hale hesitated. "I can't say." Poirot nodded, as though this confirmed something. He stood and moved to the window. "Inspector," he asked casually, "did you notice the window was open?" "Yes." "Ventilation?" "In March." Poirot said. With the sea so close. Hale frowned again. Perhaps Mr. Harcourt liked fresh air. Perhaps, Poirot agreed. Or perhaps someone needed it. He did not elaborate. Instead, he asked Hale to describe the estimated time of death. About 9 o'clock, Hale said. Based on body temperature. Give or take. Give or take 3 minutes. Poirot asked mildly. Hale stared. Why 3? Poirot gestured around the room. Every clock in this house is 3 minutes fast. Including those in this workshop. Hale looked uncomfortable. That proves nothing. No, Poirot agreed. But it suggests something. They returned to the house. Hale soon took his leave, unconvinced but polite. Poirot watched him go, then turned to Miss Harcourt. May I ask, he said, who discovered your cousin's body? Mrs. Fenwick, she replied. She came to tidy the workshop. And she summoned help? Yes. She ran straight to the telephone. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He asked to see Mrs. Fenwick. The housekeeper received him in the kitchen, her manner brisk. Poirot wasted no time. When you found Mr. Harcourt, he said, what did you do first? She answered promptly. I checked if he was breathing. He was not. I went to call the police. Did you touch anything else? No. Poirot regarded her steadily. Did you notice the clocks? Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. They were ticking. Yes, Poirot said. But were they correct? She hesitated. I did not look. Poirot smiled gently. You are a woman who notices what is out of place. That is your pride. Her jaw tightened. I had just found a dead man. Precisely, Poirot said softly. Moments like that sharpen the senses. She said nothing more. Poirot let her go. That afternoon, Poirot sat alone in the drawing room, his notebook open. He drew a small timeline, marking events carefully. Edwin Harcourt, alive sometime before 9. Dead shortly after. Clocks altered, either just before or just after death. Window opened. Shelf loosened or tampered with. Shoe polish on the floor. He underlined one phrase twice, 3 minutes. Time, Poirot reflected, was the only witness that never lied, unless someone forced it to. He rang for Simon Harcourt. Simon entered with his usual easy smile. You wanted to see me? Yes, Poirot said. I am curious about your telephone call. Simon laughed. Everyone seems to be. You said you were at the post office at 3 minutes past 9. That's right. And you remember this because... The clock chimed. Poirot nodded. You rely on clocks. Doesn't everyone? Poirot leaned forward. Not everyone adjusts them. Simon's smile faltered. I didn't. Of course, Poirot said smoothly. I do not say you did. I only note that you are attentive to time. Simon recovered quickly. My uncle taught me that. Poirot smiled back. Then he taught you very well. When Simon had gone, Poirot rose and walked the length of the house once more. He stopped before each clock, listening. Their error was uniform, obedient. Someone had taken care to ensure that. In the workshop, he made one final inspection. This time, he noticed something new, a tiny sliver of wood near the shelf support, freshly cut, hidden behind a toolbox. Poirot picked it up delicately. Ah, he murmured. So it was prepared. As evening fell, Poirot returned to his room. He took out his pocket watch and, after a moment's thought, set it back by exactly 3 minutes. He placed it on the bedside table and watched it tick. "Let us see," he said softly, "who is most comfortable when time is wrong." Downstairs, the clocks chimed together. 3 minutes past the hour. Poirot closed his eyes, certain now that the truth was very close, waiting patiently, like a clock wound tight, for the precise moment to reveal itself. Chapter 5: False Hours. The next day began with rain, fine, needling, and persistent. Poirot regarded it from the breakfast table with mild distaste, then turned his attention to matters far more absorbing. If time in Harcourt House had been altered, he intended to discover who benefited most from the deception. He announced, with courteous firmness, that he wished to speak with each member of the household privately. Miss Harcourt agreed at once. Simon rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Mr. Reed looked uneasy. Mrs. Fenwick's face remained unreadable. Poirot began with Mrs. Fenwick. She sat opposite him in the small parlour, her back straight, her hands folded with precision. Poirot noticed that her shoes were once again impeccably polished. "You have served the Harcourt family a long time," Poirot said pleasantly. 22 years, she replied. "I value order." "Yes," Poirot said. "Order? Cleanliness. Routine. You knew your employer's habits." "Of course." "And his hours?" She hesitated. "Mr. Harcourt worked late. Often until 10 or 11. And on the night he died. I went to bed at 8:30. He was alive then." Poirot nodded. "You are certain of the time?" "Yes." The kitchen clock chimed. Poirot smiled faintly. "The kitchen clock is 3 minutes fast." Mrs. Fenwick stiffened. I mean approximately." Poirot let the matter drop. Instead, he asked about the polishing of floors. "I cleaned the workshop after the accident," she said. "There was blood." "And before?" "It was clean enough." Poirot rose. "Thank you, Mrs. Fenwick. You have been most helpful." Her eyes followed him as he left, sharp and thoughtful. Next came Simon Harcourt. Simon sprawled comfortably in an armchair, projecting ease. Poirot suspected effort beneath it. "You are fond of your uncle," Poirot began. "Of course," Simon said readily. "He raised me, after all." "And yet you disagreed with him." Simon shrugged. "We argued. Everyone does." "About money." Simon laughed. "Always about money." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You needed it." Simon's smile thinned. "Who doesn't?" Poirot said nothing for a moment. Silence, he knew, made people talk. Finally, Simon sighed. "Yes, I was in debt. Edwin knew it. He refused to help. And you were angry." "I was frustrated," Simon corrected. "But I didn't kill him." Poirot inclined his head. "I did not say you did." Simon relaxed a little. "Then what are you saying?" Poirot smiled. "That you remember the time of that evening with great accuracy." Simon's eyes flicked to his watch. "I'm punctual by nature." "Ah," Poirot said. "By nature or by necessity?" Simon frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Poirot said gently, "that you were very careful to fix the moment when you were elsewhere." Simon stood abruptly. "Are you accusing me?" "No," Poirot replied calmly. "I am observing you." Simon left in a huff, the door closing rather harder than necessary. Poirot made a note. He saw Mr. Reed last. Mr. Reed arrived looking pale, his hands restless. He declined the offered chair, then thought better of it and Saturday. "You manage the accounts," Poirot said. "Yes." "You were close to Mr. Harcourt." "In business," Mr. Reed said carefully. "And in trust." Mr. Reed swallowed. "Yes." Poirot opened the ledger and placed it between them. "These entries," he said, pointing. "They are recent." Mr. Reed stared at them. "Edwin updated the books often." "But not like this," Poirot said softly. "The ink is wrong. The pressure is wrong. The hand, almost right, but not quite." Mr. Reed's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're suggesting." Poirot leaned back. "I suggest nothing. I observe." Mr. Reed stood suddenly. "If that's all." "For now," Poirot said. "Yes." Left alone, Poirot reviewed his impressions. Each person had something to hide. That was common enough. But one thing troubled him. The clocks. Everyone accepted them. Everyone relied on them. Yet no one questioned their error. That afternoon, Poirot conducted a small experiment. He adjusted nothing. He merely watched. At precisely 5 o'clock, according to his own watch, he positioned himself in the hall. The tall clock chimed. 5 minutes later than it should have. 3 minutes passed. Simon emerged from the drawing room at once. 5 already, he said. "I must send that telegram." Interesting, Poirot thought. Simon trusted the clock without hesitation. Mrs. Fenwick, passing by, paused. "Tea in 15 minutes, she said automatically. Again, no doubt. But when Mr. Reed entered shortly after, he glanced at the clock and hesitated. His eyes narrowed, just for a second, before he checked his own watch. Poirot's gaze sharpened. That evening, a discovery was made. Inspector Hale arrived unexpectedly, holding a check. "We found this in Simon Harcourt's room," he said. "Signed by Edwin Harcourt. Recently torn." Simon protested loudly. Miss Harcourt looked stricken. Poirot examined the check carefully. It was real enough. But something about it displeased him. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "when was this check cashed?" "It wasn't," Hale replied. "That's the point." Poirot nodded. "Exactly." Simon stared at him. "What are you saying?" "That this check is bait," Poirot replied. "And you are not the fish." Hale frowned. "You think someone planted it?" "Yes." "Why?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Because the truth is inconvenient." That night, Poirot sat in his room, the check now locked safely in his case. He took out his pocket watch and compared it to the bedside clock. 3 minutes difference. He adjusted nothing. Instead, he waited. Shortly before midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the corridor. A pause. Then silence. Poirot smiled to himself. "False hours," he murmured. "They comfort those who know they are false." He lay back, confident now that the net was tightening. Someone in Harcourt House had arranged time itself to serve their purpose. And soon, very soon, Poirot intended to let time strike back. Chapter 6: The Red Herring. The following morning dawned clear and brittle, the rain having scrubbed the sky to a pale, uneasy blue. Harcourt House looked deceptively calm, as though nothing within its walls had shifted. Poirot, however, knew better. Calm was often the final courtesy before upheaval. Inspector Hale returned early, his manner brisk and purposeful. News, it seemed, travelled quickly in Seabourne. "We've been over the check again," he said, standing by the window in the drawing room. Signed by the deceased, found in the nephew's room, never cashed. Motives there. Opportunity 2. Simon Harcourt, seated stiffly on the sofa, flushed. This is absurd, he protested. Someone's framing me. Hale raised an eyebrow. That remains to be seen. Poirot watched the exchange with polite detachment. He was less interested in the volume of Simon's indignation than in its quality. It was loud, emotional, yet unfocused. A man defending himself, yes, but not one who had prepared a crime. Monsieur Simon, Poirot said gently, may I ask you something? Simon turned on him eagerly. Of course. When you discovered this check was missing, did you search for it? Simon hesitated. I.e. no. I assumed my uncle had destroyed it. Poirot nodded. A reasonable assumption. Inspector Hale frowned. You're being very charitable, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled. Charity has nothing to do with it. Precision does. He rose and addressed the room. Inspector, you believe this check is evidence of motive. Yet motive alone is a blunt instrument. It tells us why someone might commit a crime, not why they did. Hale crossed his arms. So you don't think Simon did it? I think, Poirot replied carefully, that someone wishes very much for you to think so. Simon stared at him. You mean, this was planted? Yes. By whom? Poirot spread his hands. That is the question that matters. The inspector was unconvinced but agreed to keep an open mind, for now. He departed soon after, taking the check with him, though not without a lingering look at Simon. Simon collapsed back into his seat. This place is becoming unbearable, he muttered. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. It is unpleasant to be suspected. But sometimes, monsieur, suspicion is useful. It distracts. From what? Poirot smiled faintly. From the truth. Later that day, Poirot requested Miss Harcourt's company for a walk along the cliffs. The air was sharp, the sea restless below. You are troubled, Poirot said. She did not deny it. Simon is foolish, but not a murderer. And yet, someone killed my cousin. Yes, Poirot said softly. And that person is counting on the family quarrel to conceal them. She stopped walking. You know who it is. I know, Poirot replied, who it is not. They returned to the house in silence. That afternoon, Poirot made a deliberate show of examining Simon's movements. He asked questions in public, lingered near him, even allowed Mrs. Fenwick to overhear a remark about strong suspicion. Simon grew increasingly agitated. Are you trying to get me arrested? Simon snapped at last. Poirot looked at him kindly. On the contrary. I am trying to save you. Simon stared, then laughed bitterly. By making me look guilty. Yes, Poirot said calmly. Because the real culprit will not like it. That evening, Poirot sat in the drawing room, pretending to read. The clock chimed, 3 minutes past 8. He did not look up. A few moments later, Mr. Thomas Reed entered quietly. He paused when he saw Poirot, then forced a smile. Good evening, he said. Good evening, Poirot replied. Mr. Reed lingered. The police, are they close to charging Simon? Poirot lowered his book. That depends. Why do you ask? Mr. Reed's fingers twisted together. It would be terrible. For Miss Harcourt. Indeed, Poirot agreed. Terrible for many reasons. Mr. Reed nodded too quickly. Yes. Well. Good night. He left, his footsteps retreating faster than when he had arrived. Poirot closed his book. "Ah," he murmured. "The fish has taken the bait." That night, Poirot set another trap. He deliberately left his notebook on the small table in the hall, its cover slightly open. Inside, written plainly, were the words, "Simon Harcourt, primary suspect." Then he retired early, extinguishing his lamp but remaining awake. The house settled. Clocks chimed. Pipes murmured. Time, false time, passed. Sometime after 11, Poirot heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard near the stairs. A pause. Then another step. Poirot did not move. A shadow passed beneath his door. Minutes later, the sound of the workshop door opening drifted faintly up the corridor. Poirot smiled in the darkness. In the morning, the house was in uproar. Mrs. Fenwick had discovered that the ledger in the workshop had been disturbed. Pages out of order. One loose sheet missing entirely. Inspector Hale was summoned at once. "This changes things," Hale said grimly. "Someone's tampering with evidence." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "Because they are afraid." "Of Simon?" Poirot shook his head. "Of me." Hale stared at him. "You think the killer went back to the workshop last night?" "I am certain of it." "Why?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because the red herring is losing its flavor. And desperate men make mistakes." Simon looked around wildly. "You see?" "I told you." Poirot turned to him gently. "Monsieur Simon, you have served your purpose admirably." "My, what?" Poirot smiled. "You were never meant to be caught. Only blamed." Silence fell over the room. Poirot straightened, his manner suddenly brisk. "Now, Inspector, if you please, I believe we are ready for the next stage." Hale swallowed. "Which is?" Poirot glanced towards the workshop, then at the clocks, all faithfully wrong. "To let time," he said softly, "correct itself." And somewhere in Harcourt House, the true culprit felt the first unmistakable tremor of fear. Chapter 7: The Silent Partner. By the following morning, tension lay over Harcourt House like a drawn wire. Politeness remained, but it had thinned to a fragile surface beneath which every glance carried suspicion. Even the clocks seemed louder, their combined ticking pressing insistently against the walls. Poirot welcomed this change. Anxiety, he believed, was an excellent conductor of truth. Inspector Hale arrived shortly after breakfast, his expression sober. "We've checked the grounds," he said. "No sign of forced entry last night. Whoever went into the workshop had free access." Poirot nodded. "Which narrows our field considerably." Miss Harcourt sat stiffly at the table. Simon paced near the window. Mrs. Fenwick stood with her hands clasped. Mr. Reed had not yet arrived. Poirot glanced at the empty chair. "Monsieur Reed is late." Miss Harcourt frowned. "He is usually punctual." "Usually," Poirot echoed. At that moment, the door opened and Mr. Reed entered, removing his hat with an apologetic smile. "My apologies. I misjudged the time." Poirot's eyes flicked, not to the man, but to the hall clock. It chimed. 3 minutes past 10. Poirot smiled faintly. "Misjudging time," he said mildly, "is very easy in this house." Mr. Reed's smile faltered. "Yes. The clocks are all wrong," Poirot finished. "But wrong in a most disciplined way." Mr. Reed said nothing. Poirot addressed the group. "Inspector, I would like permission to conduct one final experiment." Hale hesitated, then nodded. "Go on." Poirot turned to Mr. Reed. "Monsieur, will you accompany me for a short walk?" Mr. Reed stiffened. "A walk?" Yes. Along the cliffs. The air is very restorative. There was a pause. Then Mr. Reed nodded. Very well. They set out together, Poirot walking with measured steps, his hands clasped behind his back. The sea crashed below, relentless and indifferent. You manage numbers, Poirot said conversationally. Accounts. Schedules. Deadlines. Yes, Mr. Reed replied cautiously. You understand timing. I suppose so. Poirot stopped walking and turned to face him. Then you understand how useful it can be to control it. Mr. Reed's face tightened. I don't know what you're implying. Poirot smiled gently. Let us speak plainly. You altered the clocks. Mr. Reed laughed weakly. That's absurd. All of them, Poirot continued. Not randomly. Not carelessly. Exactly 3 minutes fast. Enough to shift the perception of time, but not enough to be noticed. Mr. Reed shook his head. Anyone could have done that. Yes, Poirot agreed. But not everyone would think to. They resumed walking. You and Edwin Harcourt disagreed, Poirot said. He discovered irregularities in the accounts. Fresh ink in old books. Numbers that did not align. Mr. Reed swallowed. You can't prove that. Poirot nodded. Not yet. They reached a point where the path narrowed. Poirot stopped again. On the night of Edwin Harcourt's death, he said, you came to the workshop. I did not. You did, Poirot said calmly. He confronted you. He showed you the ledger. He intended to expose you. Mr. Reed's hands trembled. That's not true. You panicked, Poirot continued. You struck him. Not with a weapon, but with the shelf you had already weakened. A clever idea. An accident waiting to happen. Mr. Reed stared at the sea. You're guessing. Poirot smiled sadly. No. I am listening to the silences. They returned to the house without another word. Back in the drawing room, Poirot gathered everyone. The atmosphere was electric. Inspector, Poirot said, the missing ledger page will be found shortly. Hale blinked. Where? In the fire grate of Mr. Reed's office, Poirot replied. Burned at the edges, but not destroyed. Hale stared, then nodded to a constable, who left at once. Poirot continued. Last night, the killer returned to the workshop to remove evidence. Why? Because the suspicion placed upon Simon Harcourt was becoming unstable. A false accusation is like a badly wound clock, it cannot run for long. Simon stared at Mr. Reed. You? Mr. Reed said nothing. Poirot turned to Mrs. Fenwick. You polished the floor after the murder, he said. Not merely to clean blood, but to erase footprints. You suspected something was wrong, but you did not know what. Her lips pressed together. I wanted order. Yes, Poirot said gently. And you preserved it, for a time. The constable returned, breathless. Inspector, we found the page. Just as Monsieur Poirot said. Hale turned slowly to Mr. Reed. Care to explain? Mr. Reed's composure cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said hoarsely. He wouldn't listen. He never listened. Poirot inclined his head. You believed yourself invisible. The silent partner. But silence, monsieur, is never empty. Mr. Reed sank into a chair, defeated. Poirot addressed the room softly. Tomorrow, I will explain everything. The sequence. The timing. The reason. He glanced at the clocks. For now, he said, let us allow time to rest. It has been abused enough. No one spoke. The clocks chimed together. 3 minutes passed. And for the first time, everyone in Harcourt House understood that the hour of truth had almost arrived. Chapter 8. The clock strikes true. The following afternoon, Poirot requested that everyone gather in the workshop. The request carried a quiet authority that admitted no refusal. Inspector Hale arrived with 2 constables, though Poirot greeted them with mild surprise, as if violence were the least interesting possibility. Miss Harcourt entered first, composed but pale. Simon followed, restless and tight-lipped. Mrs. Fenwick stood near the door, hands clasped. Mr. Thomas Reed was last, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. The workshop hummed with its familiar discord, dozens of clocks ticking at slightly different speeds, each insisting on its own version of the moment. Sunlight filtered through the high window, catching on brass and glass. Poirot stood at the centre, perfectly still. Mesdames et messieurs, he said at last, we are surrounded by lies. No one spoke. Poirot gestured to the clocks. These clocks are very honest machines. They do exactly what they are told. If they are wrong, it is because a human hand has made them so. He turned to Inspector Hale. Inspector, you estimated the time of death at around 9 o'clock. Yes. Based on body temperature, Poirot continued. But body temperature is influenced by environment. And here, he swept his hand around the room, we have an environment carefully arranged to deceive. Simon frowned. What do you mean? Poirot smiled at him kindly. You were told the time of death was 3 minutes past 9. You remember this clearly because you heard a clock chime at the post office. But that clock, Poirot raised a finger, was already 3 minutes fast. Simon stared. Then the time was 9 o'clock exactly, Poirot said. Or very close to it. He turned to Miss Harcourt. Your cousin was alive when you brought him tea shortly before 9. He died minutes later. Miss Harcourt closed her eyes. Poirot continued calmly. Mr. Reed arrived that evening to discuss business. Edwin Harcourt had discovered irregularities in the accounts. Fresh ink. Altered figures. Small sums, taken carefully, over time. Mr. Reed made a small, broken sound. He confronted you, Poirot said. You knew he intended to expose you. You panicked. But you did not strike him in a rage. No. You prepared. Poirot walked to the shelf above the workbench and tapped it lightly. This shelf was not loose by accident. A support had been cut, just enough. It would hold until it was nudged. He held up the sliver of wood he had found days earlier. You argued, Poirot went on. Voices raised. Edwin sat on his stool, exactly as he always did. You pushed the shelf. It fell. A tragic accident, perfect in appearance. Simon whispered, My God. Poirot nodded. But an accident needs witnesses, or rather, it needs time to confirm it. He turned to the clocks again. After Edwin fell, you altered every clock in this house. Not wildly. Not differently. All by 3 minutes. Inspector Hale frowned. Why 3? Because it is small, Poirot replied. Small enough to escape notice. Large enough to shift responsibility. 3 minutes allowed you to place yourself elsewhere when the death was believed to have occurred. He looked directly at Mr. Reed. You knew Edwin's obsession with precision would prevent anyone from questioning the clocks. His authority continued even after his death. Mr. Reed's hands clenched. You can't prove. Poirot raised a hand gently. Ah, but I can. He gestured toward Mrs. Fenwick. You found the body. You noticed the clocks, though you did not consciously register their error. Later, you polished the floor, not only to clean blood, but to restore order. In doing so, you erased traces of shoe polish left by someone who wished to move silently. Mrs. Fenwick's lips trembled. I didn't know. No, Poirot said softly. But you felt something was wrong. He turned to Simon. The check found in your room was planted. A red herring. Someone wished suspicion to fall upon you. Simon stared at Mr. Reed in disbelief. You let them think it was me. Mr. Reed looked up at last. His face was grey. I didn't mean for it to go so far. Poirot's voice hardened, not loudly, but unmistakably. You altered time itself to protect yourself. You returned to the workshop to destroy evidence. You forgot one thing. Mr. Reed swallowed. What? Poirot took out his pocket watch. Time, he said, always remembers its true rhythm. He held the watch beside the nearest clock. The difference was clear. Inspector Hale leaned closer, then straightened. You reset them, Hale said slowly. No, Poirot corrected. I did not. I merely waited. Mr. Reed, when the pressure grew, checked his own watch against the house clocks. He hesitated. That hesitation betrayed him. Silence filled the workshop, broken only by ticking. Finally, Mr. Reed sagged. I took small amounts. I told myself I'd replace them. Edwin would have ruined me. Poirot inclined his head. Instead, you ruined him. Inspector Hale nodded to the constables. They stepped forward. As Mr. Reed was led away, Miss Harcourt covered her face. Simon stood beside her, awkward, protective. Poirot waited until they were alone. You see, he said gently, the truth was always here. It was merely 3 minutes out of sight. Miss Harcourt managed a faint smile. You gave my cousin justice. Poirot bowed. He respected time. It was only fitting that time should speak for him. Later that evening, Poirot stood in the hall as Mrs. Fenwick carefully reset each clock. One by one, they chimed, this time together, precisely on the hour. Poirot checked his watch and nodded, satisfied. Outside, the sea was calm at last. Order had been restored. And time, once again, was telling the truth.